Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a special guest speaker today, Sana Malik. She's a licensed ADHD executive function parenting coach. I'm so excited that I finally got to meet you and we talk about this subject because this is very dear to me and it's very important to a lot of people. I think every household is dealing with it in some sort. And most of us have no idea what it is. Up to maybe 6 years ago, I had no idea what ADHD was. I grew up in a different country. We don't believe in ADHD. We just get up and get stuff done. But my husband has it. And it was a shock to me in the beginning of our marriage. Like, why do you do things this way? It has to be this way. So I did a lot of research. I learned a lot about it. And alhamdulillah, it was a very big eye-opening. I'm really excited to hear from you and learn from you today. And I don't want to take so long from you. So go ahead and introduce yourself and then we'll start, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Sana. I am a certified positive discipline parent coach, as well as a licensed ADHD executive function coach. And actually, Mariam, like you, maybe a decade ago, I didn't know what ADHD was either. I heard of it, but in terms of the details of what it entails, I didn't have much of an idea either. But alhamdulillah, Allah chooses people for a certain path. And I feel like this was supposed to be mine. So alhamdulillah. Bit of self-disclosure. I like to call myself semi-diagnosed, which means that I tried to get a diagnosis 3 years ago during COVID, and it was over the phone with a psychiatrist. And she was an interesting character because, like, after 40 minutes, she said, "Okay, I think we should start off with some medication." And I was like, "No, that's not what I'm here for. I don't want medication right now." Not that I'm against medication, to be fair. I think it can really help some people, but I just didn't think I wanted that as a first step of my diagnosis instead of as a last resort. So she never actually gave me it. Like to finish the story, she never gave me a full diagnosis. So I like to call myself semi-diagnosed. So yeah, I've been on a journey since then to try and just figure out stuff for myself more. And from what we know through research, ADHD has a very strong genetic component. Around 40% of children who are diagnosed tend to have parents who also have ADHD, as well as, I want to say, it's 30% of siblings as well. So there's a pretty strong genetic component to it. So let's get started. I am going to pull up my slides and inshallah, do I have, if you can allow me to screen share?
Sure.
So this is a pretty long presentation, and I don't think I'll be able to cover all of it, but I'm going to try and get through as much as I can. And inshallah, if you guys have any questions, you can ask me. When Mariam and I talked about this, about what we should be covering today, I highly suggested that we should cover just like a basic understanding of ADHD and executive function first, just so that we can understand how very pervasive the effects of executive dysfunction are. Because I feel like for myself, as well as other clients that I have, that it tends to be very validating for us to actually understand that what we struggle with is not something that's necessarily like a moral weakness or something that is like, if I could just push myself, I'll do better. If I just keep trying harder, I can fix this. It's like, something is wrong with me that I'm not able to do it. So I found that it's been extremely validating for me and for my clients to know that there's actually reasons why we struggle with the struggles that we have. And it's because that Allah's created our brains differently, our nervous systems function differently than neurotypical people do. I think I just wanted you guys to have this basic understanding of what ADHD and executive function issues are. And then inshallah, maybe at a later time or a different Halaqa, we can try and get more into how to work through some of those things. All right.
We'll be happy to have a part 2 anyway.
Okay, definitely, inshallah. All right. Just before I get into executive function, quick idea about ADHD. For those of you who might know or not know, ADHD is an official diagnosis in the DSM, which is basically what doctors use to diagnose people. and it's called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which there are three components of it, how they tend to identify people. There's one where there's some people who exhibit. So a quick thing before I start talking about the medical language, that so in terms of disability, when we talk about ADHD, autism, and other, so I just did want to mention how people tend to understand neurodiversity these days is there are two ways of looking at it. Neurodiversity basically means the idea that Allah created all of our brains a little differently. And there are some brains that are neurotypical, which means that's most of the majority of the people. That's how we see we see around us most of the time. And society, the way it's functioning is designed to cater to that majority. So that's the neurotypical majority. And then, of course, there's the neurodivergent, which is something that's going away from the norm. And that would be where, or ADHD or mental illnesses, stuff like that, people who have different brains, that tends to kick in. There are two ways of how we see them right now. One of them is the medical model of disability, which basically means that deficits in that particular individual. So that is why that person is disabled. So if you look at the DSM, they will probably tell you that a person with ADHD has issues with this. These are their challenges. These are the areas of struggle. That's how they define, like they see this neurodivergence. And of course, then there's another model now, which is starting to become more prominent, and which I do tend to align with as well, which is called the social model of disability. And by that, what we basically mean is that, just like I was saying before, the way society is currently set up, it's meant to affirm and support a certain kind of neurotype, right? If I make it a little simpler, thinking about it in terms of physical disability, so a person who uses a wheelchair, right? They could have access to all sorts of opportunities in life if society was set up a certain way for them to be able to access all of that. However, right now, being on a wheelchair can be very disabling because people who are on wheelchairs tend to struggle because not all the buildings have ramps for them, right? Not all the office buildings have access where they're able to easily move back and forth. Hotels, restaurants, whatever it may be, right? So in a way, that is what is really causing the person's disability, where they're not able to function to their full potential in society because society is not currently set up to support them. Same thing goes when we talk about the social model of disability around neurodivergence. Same thing happens with people who are autistic or who have ADHD, that the world right now is just so fast paced that any child who's not able to sit in a classroom for 7 hours a day, constantly following directions the entire time, who is being told, this is when you need to focus on this, and this is when you need to focus on that, and now work on this station for 10 minutes. But as soon as you get interested in it, now you have to move on to the next station. And now you have to really, that is part of your executive function, which is like shifting your attention from one task to another. And not all children are able to do that easily, right? The transition is not easy for them. And then we slap on that label for them. Oh, it looks like this child might be struggling with ADHD. And maybe that child does have ADHD, but the point is that it's not the ADHD that's disabling. Maybe it's the expectations that we have from that particular child and the way our classrooms are set up or the school is set up, which can be disabling for that particular child. So that's the social model of disability that I wanted to mention. And the reason why I brought this up is that the language that I might be using today, I might be borrowing it from the medical model of disability just because that's what's so rampant in our society. So things like symptoms and markers, stuff like that. But I just wanted to highlight that I actually do adhere more to the social model of disability and not the medical model. Anyway, going back to what I was saying about what ADHD is. So right now in the DSM, they call it the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Even though now the more research that we're getting about ADHD, we are understanding that the problem is not there's a deficit of attention. The problem is that there is a regulation of attention. That's the problem. The people with ADHD have. So we're not able to regulate our attention as well as neurotypical people can do. So that's what I want to highlight. And again, there are three ways this shows up. One is that some of these people who have an ADHD diagnosis, they tend to be very hyperactive. A lot of boys, especially traditionally boys, are considered to have ADHD because they're very hyper. They're like bouncing off the walls and maybe the child has ADHD. So there's that presentation, but then there's also the presentation where it's like an inattentive type, and a lot of girls with ADHD tend to fall into this category where it's more that how they call it, oh, she's so spacey, she's so absent-minded, she keeps getting distracted, and we're talking to her. She's not, sorry?
Like her chatty, she talks so much.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So that could be part of that too, definitely. So yeah, there are like three, and then of course there's a mixed one where you could have both inattentive type as well as hyperactive as well. So there are three different ways ADHD can be presented when you go to diagnose it. All right. So basically, what I wanted to focus on today was what is called executive function, because ADHD is basically, if I want to use the terminology of disorder, which I'm not too happy about, but it's an issue with executive function. It's a disorder of executive function. And basically what that really means, if I want to try and like put it in layman terms, is executive functions are the skills that help you manage how you do what you intend to do. If you have a particular task in mind that I want to get through my laundry today and make sure that I give the kids lunch at this time, and then we sit down at the table for our English work, being able to accomplish what you're intending to do, that's you're using your executive function skills. So what I'm going to show you is what is called the brain hand model. When we talk, if you think about the brain, this is the part, if I imagine that this is my brain, this would be the part of our brain that is responsible for our survival mechanisms, right? If you've heard of fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, this is where they originate. It's called the autonomic system, where we get automatic responses when we encounter what our body interprets as stress or danger. So that is where that would be. This would be where the feelings are. And now this is where all of our thinking happens. So if I call it the thinking brain or the prefrontal cortex, this is where all the thinking is happening, all the learning is happening, all the making connections is happening, all the good stuff is happening right here. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that this is the part of the brain that actually develops the last out of the entire brain, which means that when children are born, the survival brain is fully functional as well as the feelings brain. This part of the brain, it actually finishes completely growing till the ages of 25 to 30 years old. That is where all the executive functions are. That's where they originate. All the thinking and planning and anticipating of time and emotional regulation, all of that is here. So just something for you guys to remember for your own kids as well, that expecting a 6-year-old or 5-year-old or 3-year-old to be able to self-regulate, it's a pretty inappropriate expectation because their brains are like way not ready. Their brains are extremely immature and they are not ready for this stuff. So just remembering that part. So this is the part of the brain again. I will be coming back to this brain hand model later as well when we talk about emotional regulation. But this is where all the executive functions as well are. And just remembering it's the last part of the brain to develop.
Yes, that's very interesting. And important to remember during meltdowns.
Yes, definitely. All right. So how does executive dysfunction manifest? It's basically how you would know if you're struggling with executive function is a person has trouble starting or finishing tasks, executing multiple steps of a project in sequence, and keeping their belongings organized. She may struggle to make decisions, and she may lose important items frequently, and he might have struggles with impulse control or emotional control. And again, causes of executive dysfunction are not just ADHD and autism, which are the most common known ones, but also like mood disorders can be a part of it. So a person who struggles with depression or anxiety, they tend to struggle with a lot of executive dysfunction as well. And of course, there are other reasons like prenatal exposure to drugs or alcohol. And another one that I think is really important to mention is early childhood trauma. That tends to really impair executive function as well. And one thing I always say to my clients is that a lot of times we're like, oh, I don't think I have any trauma. I had such a wonderful childhood. And which I'm sure you did. And I really hope you did. But it's just important to like just remember that if my knee is hurting, I can't just sit here and diagnose it for myself, whether I have arthritis or not. I need to go see a specialist for them to be able to diagnose it for me. And same thing goes for like trauma. I think it's important for us to just not assume that we have trauma or we don't have trauma. It's important to actually allow to reach out to a professional who can actually diagnose it for us and then guide us to further steps. Because if a lot of people who don't have ADHD, they can still struggle with executive function. And one of the reasons could be childhood as well.
Yeah.
So,
May I ask you a very quick question?
sure.
Since you're saying that the executive part of the brain that is responsible for executive function, and it doesn't develop fully until they're around 30. Is it possible that the kids that have ADHD that do therapy and don't really need medication with time can outgrow it? Or that's not a possibility? It's something that is a disability cannot outgrow ever.
Did you end up losing her in the end as well, or was that just me?
Yeah, she said it's the same question. Is it going to be forever, or are they going to be able to out?
So the thing with kids with ADHD is
I missed the beginning. Maybe I missed the beginning. I joined a little bit later. So the part of the brain that is responsible for many things that the ADHD causes, since it doesn't fully develop until they're 30, around 30, is it possible that they, with the appropriate therapy, obviously not like self-treating it with this behavioral therapy and teaching them how to regulate, would it be possible that they will outgrow it someday?
Yes. So what we know right now from research is that 75% of kids who were diagnosed with ADHD tend to have, so it's like chronic, where 75% of kids do have ADHD struggles as adults too. But it does give you that 25% as well who could outgrow that diagnosis as well. I think, again, like I said before, that, and you said that you weren't here, so that's fine, that I am not against medication at all. I do think it really can help some people. The important thing to know about medication, though, is that while it can help your brain regulate its neurotransmitters enough to slow down enough to actually learn the skills, medication by itself does not teach anybody skills, right? We will still need to work with the child in order to teach them, like, again, how to work with their executive function issues and how to gain those skills. And just like one random thing I do want to mention is that regulation is not something we teach. Regulation is something we experience. With enough experiencing of feeling of safety and calm, when a child has experienced that enough with a safe adult, with a safe, calm adult, it is only then they can actually use that experience to self-regulate later. So this process is called co-regulation. I will touch on it a little bit later on. But I just wanted to put that out there. A lot of times we expect children to be able to self-regulate or have self-control or discipline themselves, but it's not something that you can just cognitively teach. It's something that has to be experienced enough times to be able for them to have their brains develop those pathways so that they can access those pathways even later when they don't have that safe adult around them as well.
I'm so happy that you brought that up because my struggle with my middle child, he's still little, but it's self-regulation. He's mostly dysregulated the majority of the time. And I was wondering lately, me trying to accommodate and help him to experience that regulation over and over, it requires a lot of energy from me.
Yes.
I was wondering if that's not going to be helpful. But like when you said that, you even gave it a name, co-regulation, it just sparked the light bulb. I'm like, okay, so actually I see the benefit and I see how it would work, because he will remember with all his senses how he felt, what he experienced when I was with him, rather than, yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad. Yeah, you're getting to experience that. And I know the way our society is set up and the messages that we get continuously it is that stop coddling them, stop doing it for them all the time. They should be able to do it for themselves. But it really is, each child is on their own developmental path. So we can't really expect all children to meet the same emotional milestones as we expect from other kids. So some children need for regulation for much longer than other kids do. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means that that's the kind of safety their brain is seeking with that support of the safe, calm adults. Let me just look at the chat. Is it also true that children with ADHD learn to mask certain aspects as they become adults? Yes. Yes. Masking in itself, I do not support or agree with. I think masking usually comes at the detriment of their emotional reserves, which means that children who are constantly masking or expected to mask run a very high risk of burnout. So just something to be really aware of. But yes, so some children, as they grow older, they do develop their own coping skills, which is fine. Everybody learns to figure out what works for them, or what feels more supportive for them. Yeah, as they grow, it becomes easier for them to cope with certain things. But just masking in itself is a problematic concept. I just wanted to point that out.
He comes from trauma for not being any person with ADHD or not who learns to mask something. It's a response to not being able to express it safely. So they felt,
yeah,
we were not safe for sharing that.
It comes at the
Sorry, I have a
expense of
question.
our authenticity as well.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I've been like speaking to a lot of moms, and I've come across videos of a lot of moms. Even with myself, I noticed that a lot of moms get diagnosed as adult women after they become moms, and I'm wondering if there's a correlation between like postpartum and that really exaggerates a lot of the symptoms that were masked before, especially if you're high functioning, right? Especially if you're so good at being like, I can achieve everything, and then being a mom just takes you to your bare minimum, and like, okay.
Yeah.
So is there a reason why
I honestly, I don't know if there's any specific research on it, but I think it makes sense what you're saying, just because like hormonally, there's just so much chaos inside of us, postpartum, as well as suddenly emotionally, like everything shifts. Now, things that we didn't realize were triggers for us, like emotional triggers, sensory triggers, now suddenly they all come at the forefront, and you have to work through them while you're responsible for the physical and spiritual and mental and emotional like safety for an entire human being. So it makes sense. And like responsibilities increase and time demands increase and restraints and constraints on time increase. So it makes sense why like people would start like realizing this is not working for me anymore. Like all the coping skills I had, or they're just not sufficing me right now. So I need something more, which would make sense why we would end up seeking additional support and getting that diagnosis as well. But yeah, I don't know if there's any research on it, but I think it makes sense what you're saying. And how can ADHD be managed without medication for adults? That is something like we don't have a whole lot of time that we can talk about. It is a lot of ADHD can be managed by learning some skills. So that would be like working with our executive function skills. The biggest thing, which again is why I wanted to talk about like what executive function and ADHD are today, is like that piece of self-acceptance. Instead of like constantly berating ourselves and loathing ourselves for our like struggles, when we start accepting this is how Allah created me, this is how my brain works. Now, instead of working against my brain all the time, if I can just work with my brain the way it is, and accommodate myself and support myself the way my particular brain needs, then I can learn the skills I need to support myself without all that shaming and blaming all the time.
Yeah.
So that would be something. That you could definitely do. A lot of people have found a lot of support in like CBT and DBT modalities of therapy for adults. That is also something we can consider. 100% worry, anxiety can worsen a trigger ADHD. It's not trigger, but like worsen ADHD symptoms for sure. And yes, they can trigger ADHD symptoms in the sense that you will see those symptoms manifest more because your anxiety, like the higher your anxiety, the lower your executive function skills, because again, you're not able to access your thinking brain as well because you're feeding the brain. All right, let's go back to this slide. All right, so I'm gonna go, like I have several listed here, but unfortunately won't be able to cover all of them. I'll try to get through as many as I can. Remembering executive function is basically the center for mental control and self-regulation in our brains. And one of those executive function skills are like being able to initiate or start a task without undue procrastination. An example of that would be if I have to pay my bills and I don't want to do that, and I'm like, okay, maybe I should go and clean my kitchen first. Okay, I'm going to clean the kitchen. While I'm cleaning the kitchen, I'll be, oh, it's time for breakfast. I'm going to make breakfast. And then, oh, if I'm making breakfast, oh, I forgot to update the grocery list. So I'm going to do that now. And ultimately, while you might be being productive anyway, you're still not doing the actual task you were supposed to do, which is the paying the bill, right? That would be the initiating task. Something that like just from like personal example would be that if I enter, so like we moved to Dallas a couple of months ago, so we still have one room that we haven't unpacked. So every time I enter that room, because there are boxes there, suddenly my anxiety spikes because I don't know where to get started. So that's the initiating part. So then I would like specifically ask my husband to tell me exactly one thing I can do. And then he will tell me, okay, gather all the toys for the kids. So I'll gather all the toys and then let's start putting them. And then, okay, gather all the books. And while it might seem like that's fairly obvious, for somebody who has executive function issues, it's not so obvious. Having somebody chunk things down for you if you struggle with them, or if you have a child who struggles with initiating tasks, just break things down for them and saying, okay, like you want a child to clean his room, like saying, okay, why don't you go ahead and start picking up all the books first? Okay, you're done with that. Now, why don't you go pick up all the toys? And again, like we can keep arguing that a child should be able to do that because he's old enough. Or we can see this is something my child struggles with, so I might as well support him the best way I can. Because if we are able to do that enough times for him, in a year or so, he might be able to make that list for himself as well. That this is how I want to break down cleaning with my room.
Or he or she would know how to ask other people, just like you asked your husband.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the executive function tasks. So that's basically like, how do I get myself to start my engine? And again, use the structure for it, a strategy. And routines tend to really help kids or adults who struggle with executive function. All right. So another executive function skill that people with ADHD tend to struggle with is what is called working memory. And this is basically the ability to keep multiple bits of information in your mind and apply them to a task. What that basically means is that it's like your mental workspace. So that is where you can temporarily store information, you can retain information, recall. So like thinking of a long division, how you need to remember what came first and what came later. Mental math, like things that you needed to do. Some kids, like they can be excellent at math, but if you ask them to do a mental math question, they'll be able to give you the answer. And that's because the problem is not that they don't know their math, it's that their working memory is pretty weak. It's basically they're not able to hold those thoughts in mind and then manipulate those thoughts. So it's basically what you need to plan and carry out thoughts, actions, and behaviors. It works with both your receptive and expressive aspects of communication, which basically means that you're talking to somebody and they just told you something about how their day was. And then 3 minutes later, you ask them again, so how was your day today? I just told you. And that's just because it slipped your mind where you're working memory, and like, no, it didn't stay in your mental workspace, that bit of information. And again, just going back to like learning and education, the idea that I'll give you a silly example. I think it was last year, I started reading the book Crazy Rich Asians. Has anybody read that book?
Reason with?
Crazy Rich Asians. Have you read that book? No. There's a movie on it too, but I just wanted to read the actual book. And it has the first 3 or 4 chapters, they introduced 25 to 30 characters. And with my memory, the kind of memory it is, I'm like, I have no idea who these people are. Later, every time they would mention, I'm like, okay, so who was this guy? Where was he mentioned? Why are we talking about him? What, like, when was he introduced? So that's like the working memory part. That was amazing. I've seen the movie. So yeah, so for something for kids or for yourself, if you tend to struggle with that, just like a quick tip would be to quickly make a list for yourself. What character was introduced, what page number was he on, and in your own words, like what was the significance of this character, and just be able to like retain that information that way. It's, and again, one part I want to quickly mention, I think especially as for adults, is that working memory is also something that helps us learn from the consequences of our actions. So sometimes like clients will say to me that, oh, like you always say that your children, like instead of imposing consequences on children, you should let them learn from the consequences of their actions, except my child never learns from the consequences of actions, and he keeps repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And there's a good chance that that child there are other reasons why he could be struggling with that too, if we're like constantly blaming the child for making mistakes or whatever, but that's a separate thing. Assuming you're doing everything right, and that child is still struggling, then there's that idea that maybe his working memory is poor in the sense that when the child makes that mistake, he's not able to remember that the last time I did this certain action, what happened from that, what is something that I can learn from it, and how can I use it in this particular moment to be able to not repeat the same mistake. But that is what is called like the working memory deficit, where they struggle with that. They're not able to make that association in the nick of time. Like later they might say, oh, I see how I did the same thing.
Why
At
doing
that
this?
moment, they're not able to make that connection. And the interesting thing is, again, just something for yourself to know is that maybe like how some kids have excellent memories, like they have, especially like neurodivergent children, they'll have excellent memories where you tell them like one phone number and they'll remember it for the rest of their life. Or you for yourself might remember your childhood phone number, but if I ask you what you ate for lunch yesterday, you'll be like, I have no idea. And that's because memory is also like 3 different kinds of memory. There's long-term memory, there's short-term memory, and then there's working memory. And every human being could excel in one kind of memory retaining while not still struggling with the another kind. And again, remembering working memory is sensitive to anxiety, stress, and pressure, which means that if we are asking a child, why did you do that? Everything goes out of their brain. Now they don't remember anything because suddenly they're feeling that extra pressure, that extra stress that, oh my God, did I just disappoint my parent for doing by doing X, Y, Z? All right. Another quick one we can talk about is planning and organizing. I think a lot of parents, as parents, we tend to struggle with this. That is like creating and prioritizing order and structure. The thing with planning is that it requires a sense of time, right? We need to be able to estimate the passage of time in order for us to be able to do what we need to do. And people with ADHD, they actually have a hard time understanding how time is passing, how much time has passed. And even if they're taking medication for it, it's not really necessary. They still recognize the difference. Like in colloquial terms, we say that people with ADHD tend to struggle a lot with time blindness, but they just don't understand like how much time is required for them to be able to do something. So if tomorrow is not the due date, then today is not the due date. I'm not going to do it. And again, of course, sense of time is variable and developmental as well, because it's not in attention to the moment, it's in attention to the future. There's now and then there is not now. So one thing that I recommend people do for kids or themselves, something that I use all the time, like my life is run by timers. Like everything I do it for timers. This is something that I found that has really helped like kids, especially. It's called the time timer. This right here, this picture. You can actually find it on Amazon or whatever stores. So if you notice it, actually the time is going backwards instead of forwards. The red color shows how much time is left. So you can actually see the passage of time.
You can see the due date approaching.
Yeah, exactly. But just like a quick caveat there, for some people it can create a sense of anxiety. So just making sure that we're not imposing this on our kids. If it's the kid who's struggling, we're like putting this forward as an option for them to regulate and like their time and keep themselves accountable rather than thinking that once it reaches 0, my mom's gonna get mad at me, right? Because then that will create that sense of anxiety. Just like being aware of that part. Timers, use as many timers as you guys can, really makes life so much easier. Time timer. Let me show it to you. It actually says it right here at the bottom, time timer. I know for certain that it's found on Amazon. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it in other places as well. So usually I stop here and I ask people to like guess this for me, like how much do you think? So typical developmental estimate. So how much do we think a neurotypical 2-year-old child can anticipate time? Like how much can they understand the future? But since we are running out of time, I'll tell you guys myself. A 2-year-old can only understand now. They don't understand if we say, oh, we'll go to the park later today. They don't understand what later today means. Same thing for 3 to 5-year-olds. If we say grandma is coming next week, they keep asking you, when is grandma coming? When's she coming? Is she coming today? Well, what time is she gonna get here? That's because they can only anticipate 5 to 20 minutes into the future. 6 to 7-year-olds, 8 to 12 hours. Like we're expecting them to plan their time so they're able to get their work done in time for tomorrow. Not really a very fair expectation because they don't understand what tomorrow looks like. Cognitively, you could ask them, but in terms of understanding how to plan for that time, now to understand how those many hours feel to them, they can't really developmentally understand that. The rest you can see it right there. Even for ourselves, if we fall into this range, we think we can plan several months ahead. Oh, vacation is in September. We think we can anticipate that much time. Unfortunately, we cannot. Our brains don't function that way. So just being
That's
kind to
amazing.
yourself.
That's just from experience. I found like when I'm homeschooling, like all the unit studies that I do up to 6 weeks is my stretch. And when I tell people who are just starting, I'm like, just start with 3 weeks. I know you can handle that. And then maybe you can stretch yourself. I guess if you have executive function issues or ADHD, maybe that's a good info to know there, to know how to plan your homeschooling schedule, when to take breaks and to start again.
And this is like typical stuff as well. So this is people who don't have ADHD, this is as far as they can do. So, and people with executive function. Yeah. So they actually are 30%, up to 30% delayed. So it can go down even more. So just like knowing it for yourselves as adults and for your kids as well, that 30% could be the delay for people who have ADHD. All right.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, what's up?
Okay, what do you mean by you can't plan that far into the future? Is it that if you put a plan together, it's not really realistic because that's what's not computing? Or can you explain what you mean exactly by that? Because anyone can write a plan for 12 months, but yeah.
Sorry, somebody saying something?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead if you have something to say.
No, I was just saying the execution is the one that you're gonna, like when we say fall off the wagon.
Yeah, exactly. It's like recognizing how, so like if I wanted to plan for dinner tonight, and I do have executive function issues. So what that would look like is some people, my sister-in-law, if you tell her that we have to leave the house by 2 p.m., she'll start planning her time at 10 a.m. and by 2 p.m. she will be at the door. For me, I don't understand how to plan for the next 4 hours so I can be out of the house on time. Because in my head, I'm like, okay, it will take me 5 minutes to get ready and 10 minutes to get the kids ready and 15 minutes. But cognitively, I can understand and plan for that time. But in terms of execution and keeping a buffer time and how much understanding how hard transitions will be for me, all of that, I cannot anticipate it the same way maybe a neurotypical person can. And going back to those neurodevelopmental timescales, some can also, if you don't have ADHD, you could very well be able to say, like, for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to lose these much pounds by doing XYZ. That might work. But if you start planning for weight loss for the next 3 months, that might be much harder for you to anticipate because, like she said, falling on the bandwagon or knowing how to pace yourself or knowing how to understand how to get that particular job done. That is where the challenge can be. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank
Another executive function skill is what is called, it's the time that it takes for us to process and respond to things. Basically, I'll wait for them to.
It's a Tuesday. Usually hotels are quiet on a Tuesday.
I know, right? It's 11 a.m. here. So. All right. So processing speed is like the speed of completing a task with reasonable accuracy. So there are different kinds of processing, which is part of it is like visual processing, how quickly our eyes perceive information relate to the brain. Verbal processing, how. So this is
We can follow with you on the slide.
Yeah, let's do that. So verbal processing would be how quickly we hear this and react to it. Thinking about those kids who you say, can you go clean your room? And they'll be like, what? Can you go clean your room? Sorry, Mama, what? Can you go clean your room? I said, why can't you hear me the first time I tell you to do something? Go clean your room. Okay, I hear you. You're like, you heard me the first time. And except they did hear you the first time, but their brains weren't able to process what we were saying fast enough for them to be able to respond appropriately by saying, oh, I get what you're saying, and I'm going to go do it now. So that's where the difference lies. Thinking about maybe for you, or I know for me, I prefer having subtitles on when I'm watching something. And again, it's not because I don't understand what they're saying. It's just that extra benefit of being able to see something visually while I'm hearing it just helps me process things faster. So that's like part of that as well. And of course, then there's that aspect of motor speed that if the task requires me to actually get up and go do something when somebody's asked me to do it, then how quickly my brain can communicate with my body in order to get that thing done, that is part of it as well. So effective processing speed requires us to be able to regulate our emotions as well as have that motor coordination. Just a quick fun fact, a lot of times when we talk about procrastination, we often think that procrastination is a time management problem, but it's actually an emotional regulation problem. The problem is not that we are not able to manage our time, which it could be too, but research shows that it has more to, like, people who tend to procrastinate a lot, they tend to have more emotional regulation issues than anything else. So that's interesting. And I could make sense too. I'm just not going to get into it. And again, processing speed, 100% is sensitive to anxiety, stress, and pressure as well. I'm trying to decide which executive function I should work on next. Anyway, so attention, of course, is a big one, considering it's ADHD, ability to sustain focus for tasks that are challenging or uninteresting. Again, like I said before, it is more about whether they're able to regulate their attention and not so much that they don't have attention, because a lot of times people with ADHD can easily hyper-focus when they're interested in something. So then they're like a lot of times people, or especially kids with ADHD, like you have that kid who's been building Legos for 6 hours and he doesn't realize that he hasn't gone to the bathroom in those 6 hours and he hasn't eaten anything in those 6 hours. And now he's extremely dysregulated because he's actually hungry. But because he's been hyper-focusing, his body and brain haven't been communicating well. So he doesn't know that he's hungry, but he's just very cranky now, right? They can pay attention when it's something that they're interested in, but not always when they need to pay attention or for as long as they need to pay attention and on what we want them to pay attention to. Of course, a result of that then becomes that they have trouble with transitioning, because they're already interested in something or they're giving attention to something, it's hard for them to transition to something that they don't want to maybe necessarily pay attention to. Because the thing with transitions is and I give this example to parents all the time, for both neurotypical kids and neurodivergent children, that it's important for us to know that when we ask somebody, when we ask a child, can you go put your shoes on so we can get out of the house? We're thinking we're just asking them to do one thing, except for a child, if we look at it from the child's perspective, first, if let's say they're playing with something or they're reading a book. Now, the first thing they need to do is they need to put away that book. Then they have to understand that, okay, I have to go put my shoes on. Like, where am I going to put my shoes on? Am I going to bring the shoes to me, or am I going to go and go next to the door and put my shoes on there? Okay, I'm going to go do that. Am I going to be wearing the shoes that I need socks for? If I need to wear socks, then there's that motor component. Like, how good of a gross motor or fine motor skills do I have where I'm able to easily coordinate and put those socks on properly? So for us, we had just asked them to do one thing, but for them, there have been so many steps that by the time the child actually puts their shoes on, some kids, especially neurodivergent children who do struggle with emotional regulation and frustration tolerance, now they're completely grumpy and they're answering you back. And you're thinking, why are you being so rude to me? I literally just asked you to do one thing, but for them, they're already exhausted because they had to do several steps that we couldn't necessarily see. Just like important to remember that transitions are like, for us, it's one thing, but there are always like 3 steps to transition. And sometimes each step needs to be addressed separately when we're trying to support somebody who is struggling with transitioning. And of course, that attention piece, especially for kids or even for yourself, can't they just sit still and pay attention? And the answer is no, not always. And why is that? Because children, honestly, I always say this, children, because they're on the fitra, they're very in tune with what works best for them. And one thing that's like that they understand is that when their body is going through some stress, so like now if you go to like therapy or you go work with a coach, they'll tell you that whenever you have some stress, and the important thing is to do is like you need to work through your stress cycle. So your stress is climbing. You can't just let it keep like rising. You need to work through it. You need to feel through it. And one way of completing that stress cycle is by moving. So they'll tell you, go outside for a walk, do 10 jumping jacks, get that energy out. And children, because they're so attuned to themselves and their fitra, that's what they'll do. Like children who tend to have a lot of stress, they do a stress, and again, not like the emotional stress that we think about, but any kind of stress. It could be pressure, it can be expectations, it can be mismatched expectations. That's something they're not able to do, but they know they have that expectation on them, or they have a really busy schedule. So all of that could cause some stress, which means that you'll see them like jumping off the walls or bouncing off the walls. And that's because they're just trying to regulate their stress levels. And another reason is that, and this is, I think, how Miriam actually discovered me, was that I posted a reel about how a couple of weeks ago I was taking a Quran class online, and I was because like it was like there were some parts that were really hard for me. I realized that the harder it was getting, the more like I was like rocking my body. I was like fidgeting with my hands. And that's because like now I know this. Before I wouldn't have known this. People would have just thought, oh, why is she like doing this? What's wrong with her? Why is she moving so much? And it's because when we are moving our bodies, it tends to stimulate the parts of our brain that regulate our attention and focus. So if you had asked me to stop moving in that moment, I would have actually lost that attention. I would have struggled with paying attention in that moment if you wouldn't have let me keep that stimulation going. So because I was able to rock back and forth and fidget with my hands, and like I was like doing this thing with tapping thing on my thighs, I was actually able to pay attention and do what was expected of me. And same thing goes with like children and yourself as well. Do you have something to say, Miriam?
Yeah, the other thing that you mentioned after that was, I forgot what you call it, what the exhaustion when the kids come home from programs, anything. And because I experienced that with my child, we're in a program that was like to me, it looks so peaceful, just a few hours, nothing compared to school. And he had such a hard time at the end. He was exhausted. Yeah. And it was all like different behavior. It was dysregulated all the time. It was such a struggle for me as well. So what did you call it? What was the term?
After school restraint collapse.
Yes, exactly. It felt like he was in a restraining
Yeah.
position for all that time, even though to me it looked so peaceful, it looked so free, and it was so nice, but it wasn't
Yeah.
for him. Yeah. And
Yeah.
he was exhausted from following the orders.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. All right.
So we're past our time. We can, inshallah, let me just check okay, Charmaine, she asked if it's possible to homeschool a child with ADHD when you have ADHD yourself. Tips and resources would be greatly appreciated. That's actually the first topic that I thought about, since a lot of moms who I coach have that problem. But inshallah, we can do another session on that because it's a big subject. Sana, she suggested that we start with understanding ADHD, and I think that was a great idea, because there's a lot of components that we did not understand about our brains, and you confirmed a lot of things that I'm going through with my family. I'm like, it means, it has a meaning. All right, so my son would tantrum for hours after daycare, yeah, and would always want the Okay, so here's one question. If you have a quick resource, Sana, where can we find info on helping kids with executive functioning challenges? Some steps to take.
Yeah. Firstly, I'm a resource. So you can
Yes.
always reach out to me. You can follow me on Instagram. I do one-on-one consults. I'm currently working on creating a course for parenting neurodivergent children. Inshallah, that's in the works. But yeah, at this point, there are a couple of resources. There's a book called Driven to Distraction. You can take a look at that. You can, there's this person, her name is Cindy Goldridge. She has a book about how to support children with executive function challenges as well. I can't remember the name of the book off the top of my head, but her name is Cindy Goldridge. Let me write her out. Dr. Russell Barkley, if you Google him, he's done a lot of research on ADHD as well. So inshallah, that could be helpful as well. And again, like there are lots of steps that we can actually take. Like Mariam said, inshallah, maybe we can set up a follow-up where we can talk about more like practical stuff. But again, like I really think it's important for us to first understand how pervasive this whole thing is and how much it impacts our lives or our child's life before we're able to get into what we can do about it. Because if we don't know what the problem is, then we can't really fix the problem, right? So that's why it's important to understand. Inshallah. That's my plan.
May I ask one more? Is there any way I can contact you about the education aspect? Because I am leaving to Turkey next week, and I am in a place where I cannot decide what to do for my son for the education because public school is not working at all. And I know that I don't want him to go to public school at least for a couple years until he is in high school. Is there any way I can contact you privately? Because I'm looking into homeschooling and I need to run it by you since you're so knowledgeable about this.
Sure. Can you see this on your screen? If you want to take a screenshot of this, feel free to do that.
1 second. What time would you be available tomorrow? I can call you if that's okay.
So I'm like traveling right now. So I want to say tomorrow, maybe after, inshallah, I should be arriving at my brother's house by 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which would be 2. So after 2 p.m., I think inshallah you could reach out to me. So just like text me first, and hopefully I should be home by then. So then we can talk.
Thank you so much. I really needed this because I cannot sleep at night because I don't know what to do at this point, and I can't get help from anyone at this point because I need to make sure that what I'm doing is right, or at least might be right. Some kind of reassurance.
Yes.
Thank
you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I want to mention quickly before everybody leaves that since you mentioned about homeschooling, that inshallah, next week we'll have a workshop for all about if you're debating to homeschool, you don't know to start that decision, to take it or not, what are the alternative education, inshallah, some resources to help you with homeschooling. So it will be on 26th. So I will send an email, inshallah. Watch out for your email, like maybe tomorrow
The
latest
problem is
update.
I am flying on the 21st and I'm literally going to be probably
Yes.
on the flight on that day.
Yeah.
So
We'll
I'll-
have a replay, inshallah. But of course, yes, reach out to
Yeah.
Sana, reach out to me as well if
Yeah.
you need any
Yeah.
help with all
Yeah,
of
I
it.
can totally. Yeah, I can give you my
Sure.
number. If you can text me your number, I would love to talk to you too.
Of course, inshallah. So this will be this is recorded, so it will be on the Muslim Homeschool app under the
Okay.
Homeschool Mom Halaqa. Also, any other workshop, anything we do is usually recorded in our Muslim Homeschool app as well. So you can check it out anytime you want.
Okay,
Okay.
I will. Thank you so much.
Right. Of course, may Allah make it easy for you and for all of us. Parenting, educating our children is not easy, especially when these challenges that we have no idea about just show up in our faces. Jazakallah khairan, Sana, so much, especially that you are
Allah
traveling.
sent you guys to me because it must be some kind of prayer answered, because
SubhanAllah.
I've been struggling for past few weeks so much. I can cry right now because I'm so like happy that I got to talk to someone that actually will understand and will be able to guide me, because I am in a place where I don't know anymore. So thank you so much.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I'm so glad that you were able to attend and you're able to benefit. Alhamdulillah, it's always stories like this when we get to meet the right people at the right time. Same like I got to meet Sana at the right time. She applied for the co-op and I saw her bio, mashallah, it was so beautiful. And I was like, that's such a gem, mashallah, in the community. That's always a great thing to see, alhamdulillah. All right, Sana, do you want to say some last thing? And then we'll stop, inshallah.
No, I'm just so glad everyone seems like they found it helpful, alhamdulillah. And yeah, inshallah, we should all stay in touch.
Inshallah, we'll try to plan a part 2 and we'll let you know when is that going to be possible. Yes, Maita, inshallah. All right, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Jazakallah khairan for attending.
Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Take care.